Marcus Hale had a talent for reading rooms, and tonight he had read this one perfectly. The neighborhood was the kind that had given up on itself a long time ago. Streetlights burned out and never replaced. Potholes deep enough to swallow a tire. Doors with 3 deadbolts that didn't actually stop anyone who really wanted to get in. He'd spent 3 weeks watching the small yellow house on the corner of Crane Street, learning its rhythms, the way the lights went off at 10:30 every night, the way the woman named Sarah Chen always parked in the same spot because the garage door had been broken for 2 months, the way the 12-year-old girl walked home from school every Tuesday and Thursday without her mother. But tonight, he decided not to wait for Tuesday. Marcus rolled the black SUV to a slow stop in the alley behind Crane Street, engine idling. His 2 associates, thick-necked men he knew only as Deke and Rowe, sat in the back without speaking. They were professionals in the way that freight handlers were professionals. They moved things from one place to another without asking what was inside. "Clean?" he asked. "Clean," Rowe confirmed, eyes scanning the alley. "No cameras, blocks dead." Marcus smiled. He had small, even teeth that somehow made his smile look worse than a snarl. "Then let's not keep the lady waiting." What happened in the next 4 minutes was efficient, ugly, and utterly without mercy. Sarah Chen walked into her kitchen and had just enough time to understand what was happening before she was silenced. She fought, God, she fought, for her daughter. In the confusion, Mia, who had been upstairs doing homework, had heard her mother's cry and come running down. Marcus had not planned for the girl, but Marcus, above all things, was an improviser. "Change of plan," he told Deke, already recalculating, already reorganizing the mental ledger in his head where human lives were line items. "She comes with us." He said it the way someone might say grab the umbrella in case it rains. He left Sarah Chen on the kitchen floor. Mia was shoved into the cargo area of the SUV before she could fully understand what was happening. She heard the latch click. She heard the men's voices, muffled now, talking about distances and timing and a place Marcus called the Fairfax House. She heard Marcus laugh at something Rowe said, a low, confident sound that belonged to a man who had done this before and expected to do it again. He wasn't thinking about loose ends just yet. He was thinking about how easy it had been. In the dark of the trunk, Mia Chen pressed her spine against the rough carpet and tried not to make a sound. Her eyes were wide open but saw nothing. Her hands, shaking violently, reached into the pocket of her hoodie. The phone was there, her school phone, the cheap prepaid her mother had bought her with a cracked screen and a battery that was always at 30%. She had no idea if it still had signal. She had no idea if anyone would answer. She didn't know who to call. Her dad was 2 states away and never picked up. She was terrified to call 911 in case the sound of sirens scared Marcus into doing something worse, something she could already feel lurking in the future like a shape in deep water. So Mia Chen did the only thing she could think to do in the dark. She dialed a number she didn't know. Her fingers, trembling and clumsy, pressed 8 random digits. Then she pressed call. And somewhere across town, in a place Mia had never been and could not have imagined, a phone began to ring. The Rusty Piston had been many things over its 30-year life on the edge of County Road 7. A salvage office, a tire warehouse, a failed diner. Under the management of the Reno chapter of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, specifically under the informal stewardship of Arthur Bear Vance, it had become something else entirely. A fortress, a temple, a place where men who had no business belonging anywhere else had carved out a corner of the world and called it theirs. On a Thursday night in late October, that corner of the world was spectacularly, unapologetically loud. The jukebox had been running for 3 hours straight, AC/DC bleeding into Lynyrd Skynyrd, bleeding into Metallica, the bass throbbing through the floorboards and up through the soles of every boot in the room, pool cues cracked, glasses thudded on scarred wooden tables. 230 men in leather vests filled the room from wall to wall, a rolling tide of noise and muscle and diesel-soaked camaraderie. Arthur Vance was not in the middle of it. He never was. Bear stood behind the bar counter, wiping down the surface with the practiced, absent motion of a man who had been doing this for a quarter century. He was 55 years old and built like a brick wall that had been in a number of serious accidents and survived every one of them. 6'4", 260 pounds, none of it decorative. His hair and beard were iron gray, shot through with the last fading echoes of black. His face was a geological survey of old violence, a nose broken and reset so many times it had simply decided to stay crooked, a jawline crossed by a scar that started under his left ear and ended somewhere below his collar, a pair of deep-set eyes the color of stormwater that saw everything in a room simultaneously and cataloged it all without apparent effort. On his right forearm, among the gallery of faded tattoos, was one that stood apart from the rest. A small angel, drawn in simple lines. Beneath it, a name, Emma, 2001-2009. He never talked about it. No one ever asked. The burner phone on the shelf behind the register buzzed. Bear looked at it. Unknown number. He picked it up with the automatic irritation of a man who had been interrupted before and had never enjoyed it. "Speak," he said. His voice was what you'd get if you put gravel in a blender with a thunderstorm. The silence on the other end lasted 2 full seconds. Then he heard it. A sound so small it almost didn't register over the noise of the bar. A whisper, a child's whisper, barely above the threshold of hearing, compressed by terror into something more felt than heard. "Please. It's dark. I'm in the trunk. They killed my mom. Are you the police?" Bear did not move for 1 second. 1 second in which everything he was, every scar, every year, every inch of hardened and deliberately built armor, cracked straight down the middle. Then he raised his left hand, one slow, deliberate motion, his palm flat, fingers spread, a gesture that, in the language of this room, in the language of these men, meant one thing and one thing only: stop. Everything. Now. The jukebox died. Someone had already pulled the plug before Bear's hand came back down. The crack of pool cues ceased mid-stroke. The laughter, the arguments, the scrape of chairs, all of it collapsed into silence with the speed and totality of a power outage. 230 hardened men stared at their president. Bear pressed the phone to his ear and turned slightly away from the bar, hunching his massive shoulders as if to create a private room around the receiver. When he spoke again, his voice had undergone a transformation that would have baffled anyone who had only ever heard the grinding gravel version. It was still low, still careful, but it was soft. The softness of a man who has broken a great many things in his life and is now trying, with enormous concentration, not to break something fragile. "No, sweetheart," he said. "We're not the police. But I need you to listen to me very carefully, okay? I'm going to help you. I promise you that. But I need you to stay on the line, and I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" A tiny pause, then the faintest exhale. Not agreement exactly, but the sound of someone who had been drowning and had just felt a hand. "Yes." "Good girl!" Bear's jaw tightened. Behind his eyes, something cold and absolute was assembling itself, putting on its armor, reaching for its weapons. But his voice didn't change. "Tell me your name." "Mia Chen." "Mia, I'm Bear. Now, I need you to close your eyes and just listen. Tell me every sound you can hear." Behind him, 230 men didn't breathe. Mia told him about the road, the rhythm of the tires, a rumble that suggested a highway. She told him about the smell of exhaust and rubber. She told him she'd heard Marcus mention something about the Fairfax house before they'd gotten on the highway, and that she thought they'd been driving for about 20 minutes. Bear was already writing on a bar napkin with a permanent marker, his handwriting huge and angular. Fairfax House, JWI. 20 men from downtown, girl in trunk, Maya Chen, 12 YRs. "Mia," he said. "You said they hurt your mom. Do you know if she's okay?" The silence that followed was the worst kind. The kind that contains a 12-year-old trying to hold herself together in total darkness. "I don't know. She was on the floor. She wasn't moving." Bear closed his eyes for precisely 1 second. When he opened them, they were the temperature of deep winter water. "We're going to check on her, too. I promise you that, Mia. We're going to fix this." "Okay. Now I need you to do something. Can you feel the back of the trunk? The taillight housing? On the right side? I think so. I need you to kick it out. Hard as you can. Keep your feet together, like a donkey kick. That'll make your car visible for us to follow. A long pause, then a series of muffled thumps, and then a crack. A rush of cold air and the bleeding orange glow of passing streetlights spilled through the new gap. I did it, Mia breathed. And for just a moment, through the fear and the darkness, there was something that sounded almost like pride. Bear almost smiled. That's my girl. Now listen, I'm going to have to put you on hold for just 1 minute. Don't hang up. Can you do that? Please, don't go. I'm not going anywhere, Mia. I'm going to be right here, and in a few minutes, I'm going to have a whole lot of friends looking for you. You stay quiet and stay brave, okay? A beat. Okay. Bear lowered the phone and pressed it against his chest. He turned to face the room. 230 pairs of eyes locked on him, some carrying the question, some already carrying the answer. His voice, when it came, was not loud. It didn't need to be. In the perfect silence, it filled every corner. There's a 12-year-old girl in a car trunk somewhere on the highway. Her name is Mia Chen. She called us by accident. He paused. She couldn't have called anyone better. No one said a word. Leo. Bear said it without looking up. From a table in the corner, a young man with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of face that belonged in a university lecture hall rather than a biker bar shot to his feet. Leo Tech Miller was 25, the youngest patched member in the chapter, and he was already pulling a laptop from his bag before his name finished echoing off the rafters. On it, Leo said. Give me the number. Bear read it from the burner's call history. Leo was already accessing the network of tools the chapter kept carefully maintained and carefully quiet. Cellular tower triangulation, local traffic camera feeds, police scanner data. Bear raised his voice one final time. We ride in 3 minutes, full chapter, every bike. He paused, and in the pause was the weight of everything he'd ever felt for the small angel on his forearm. Tonight, we are her guardian angels. The room did not cheer, it didn't roar, it simply moved, a single organism with 230 hearts, reaching for jackets and keys, surging toward the doors with the quiet, implacable momentum of a tide that has made up its mind. Outside the Rusty Piston, the parking lot was a cathedral of chrome and steel. 230 Harley-Davidsons stood in rows, their metal glinting under the amber wash of the sodium lights. Fat Boys and Soft Ales and Road Kings and Street Glides, their V-twin engines cold but ready, their custom paint jobs and club patches and road-worn saddle leather testifying to decades of miles and decades of loyalty. Each machine was an extension of the man who wrote it, and right now every one of those men was moving with the focused, wordless efficiency of people who had been waiting for exactly this kind of moment without knowing it. I have her signal, Leo called, clicking across the parking lot with his phone in one hand and his helmet in the other, eyes bouncing between the screen and the ground ahead. Cell phones pinging off a tower on the Route 9 corridor, moving east-northeast at approximately 65 miles an hour. Route 9 East. Bear was already on his bike, a 2019 Street Glide, matte black with a chrome skull on the front fender, its body as scarred and storied as its rider. He pulled on his fingerless gloves. 3 warehouses in the Fairfax district, 2 active, 1 empty since the Meridian fire. If they want a safe house, they want the empty one. Fairfax Industrial Complex, said a broad-shouldered man named Cutter, the chapter's sergeant-at-arms for 11 years, whose geographical memory of the county was encyclopedic. Old textile mill. 2 entry points. Main gate on Fairfax Road, secondary loading dock on the back rail spur. Then that's where she's going. Bear brought the phone to his ear one final time before they rode. Mia, you there? Yes, I'm here. We're coming. We are on our way right now. Stay low and stay quiet. Don't let them know you still have the phone. Okay, Bear? He paused. Yeah? Are there a lot of you? Bear looked up. The parking lot was a sea of leather and chrome, men pulling on helmets, engines beginning to turn over one by one, the low rumble building from a murmur to something that vibrated in the chest. He tucked the phone into the breast pocket of his vest, close to his heart where he could feel the faint warmth of the open line. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said. "There are a lot of us." He turned his key. The Street Glide's engine spoke, a deep, authoritative bark that rolled across the parking lot and was immediately joined by another and another and another, until the sound was no longer a collection of individual machines but a single, unified voice. A bass chord struck on the world's largest instrument, a sound so physical it pressed against the eardrums like a firm hand. Windows in the bar vibrated. Gravel skittered across the asphalt. 3 doors on the nearest buildings rattled in their frames. 230 engines, all at once. Bear pulled out of the lot first. 2 headlights behind him became 4, became 8, became a river of white light stretching back as far as the eye could follow, roaring into the dark October night with the patient, unstoppable certainty of a force of nature that had somewhere to be. The trunk smelled like motor oil and old carpet, and the particular smell of fear, which Mia was starting to think might just be the smell of herself. She lay on her side with her knees pulled toward her chest, trying to slow her breathing the way her mother had taught her when the panic attacks came. Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Her mother, who was on a kitchen floor in a house on Crane Street, Mia made herself stop the thought before it finished forming. Stay in the now, she told herself. The hole where the tail light used to be spilled a rectangle of cold air and strobing highway light into the trunk. Every time a car passed going the other way, the light swept through, and for a moment, Mia could see her own hands, pale and small, and the rough walls around her. She had kicked the tail light out on the first try. She hadn't expected herself to be able to do it, hadn't expected her own body to obey, but Bear's voice had been so certain, "You can do it, I know you can," that her legs had simply believed him. She was still in the trunk. Marcus was still laughing at something up front, but the hole was there, and it meant they could find her. The hair clip, she reminded herself. Bear said breadcrumbs. He'd told her quietly, between the main conversation and the hold, to leave anything she had at any stopping point. "We'll be looking for things that don't fit," he'd said. "Anything small. You leave it, we'll find it." Mia wore her dark hair in a low braid, held by 2 metal clips, tiny silver butterflies with a blue stone in each wing, the kind her mother ordered in bulk from the dollar section online. She worked one out of her hair and held it in her palm, feeling the cool press of the metal. It felt like an anchor. The car was slowing. She felt the road's texture change, smooth highway giving way to something rougher, more broken, and heard Marcus's voice from the front seat. 30 minutes. Good time. Good time to where? The phrase made her stomach contract. Through the taillight hole, she saw the canopy of a gas station overhead, fluorescent lights, the SUV pulling in, a door opened, footsteps on gravel, the casual, unhurried sound of someone stretching after a long drive, then moving away. A convenience store door chimed open and swung shut. She had maybe 2 minutes, maybe less. The hair clip was still in her palm. She reached through the taillight gap, her arms scraping against the broken edge of the plastic housing, and let the clip fall. She heard it ping against the asphalt. Too soft for anyone nearby to notice, but it would catch the light. It would catch the right eyes. She pulled her arm back in, heart hammering, and then she heard something else, something that made her go very still. It was distant, maybe half a mile back down Route 9, maybe further, but it was unmistakable. A low, rolling vibration that was less a sound than a pressure, felt in the sternum and the back teeth before it was heard by the ears. Engines. Many, many engines. Mia pressed her cheek against the rough carpet and squeezed her eyes shut. They're coming. The thought rose in her chest like something warm. He wasn't lying. They're actually coming. The convenience store door chimed again. Marcus got back in, tossing something to the front seat. The SUV rolled out of the station and back onto the road. Through the taillight hole, Mia watched the fluorescent canopy recede in the dark, growing smaller and smaller. She pressed her hand over the phone in her pocket, feeling the warmth of the open call against her ribs. He promised, she told herself. She held on to that. 2 miles back down Route 9, 230 headlights turned into the gas station. Not all at once. The chapter spread itself across the landscape like a moving net. Teams fanning out on every side road that branched off the main corridor, Leo's real-time triangulation feeding coordinates to a chain of cell phones that passed information forward to Bear at the head of the column the way a nervous system sends signals to the brain. The main body of bikes held Route 9, moving at a steady 65 with Bear at the front, his engine's cadence as deliberate and relentless as a metronome. It was at the gas station that they got the first real confirmation. Danny Hound Rourke, a grizzled man in his late 40s with a hawk's nose and 30 years of reading roads, hopped off his bike before it fully stopped and crouched at the edge of the forecourt. He swept his phone's flashlight in a low arc across the asphalt. It caught a flash, a small thing, a tiny butterfly shape with a blue stone, catching the light like a dropped star. Hound picked it up between two thick fingers and held it up. He nodded. He was on the phone to Bear in under 10 seconds. Hair clip. Blue butterfly. She was here. He paused. She's smart, Bear. Real smart. I know she is. Bear's voice carried no warmth in it at this particular moment, just the steady, controlled heat of absolute resolve. Which way from the station? Tire tracks in the gravel go south toward the back roads. A beat. Fairfax Road cuts south off Old Mill Road. They're heading straight for the industrial complex. Tell Cutter to take the secondary teams down Mill Road and lock off the back entrance. Bear's voice was absolute. Nothing gets out. Copy. The net tightened. Bear had been running operations of one kind or another since his mid-20s. Supply routes, territorial negotiations, the kind of work that shaped the underground topography of the county in ways most people never saw. He knew how to move men. He knew how to read terrain. He knew how to think 3 steps ahead of someone who believed he had no one thinking about him at all. Marcus Hale, whoever he was, had made a catastrophic error. Not just the kidnapping, though that alone would have been enough. No, his catastrophic error had been simpler and more banal. He had not checked who he was driving past when he pulled into that gas station. Leo, Bear said. What's her battery at? 8%, Leo replied, his voice tight. We might lose the signal soon. Then we stop relying on it. Bear's jaw set. We know where they're going. We go. He rolled the throttle. The column accelerated. A black river flowing south through the dark, chrome glinting under the stars. 230 engines singing a single note of absolute, unhurried purpose. Marcus was feeling good. He always felt good on a job when everything went to plan, and everything had gone to plan. Sarah Chen had been dealt with. The girl was secured. The buyer had been contacted. The Fairfax house was prepped. By tomorrow morning, this would be finished, and Marcus would be 200 miles away and $50,000 richer. He turned the SUV off Route 9 and onto the back road that wound through a scrubby patch of former farmland toward Fairfax Industrial. Dirt and crumbled asphalt, dark enough that his headlights only reached 20 feet ahead. No streetlights, no houses, no cameras. Perfect. He didn't notice the distant thunder that had been building on Route 9 behind him, growing imperceptibly louder over the last 15 minutes like a storm that had not yet announced itself. Bathroom break, Deke announced. Marcus sighed. Seriously. I gotta go. Fine. 2 minutes. Marcus pulled the SUV to a stop at the junction where the back road crossed an old service lane, the kind of spot you could sit for an hour without seeing another vehicle. Deke climbed out, disappeared into the darkness at the road's edge. Rowe shifted in the back seat, checking his phone. Buyer confirmed the timeline? Midnight, Marcus said. Good. Rowe glanced toward the trunk, the way someone might glance at luggage they'd forgotten about. She's been quiet. Quiet's good. Marcus drummed his fingers on the wheel, watching the darkness ahead, thinking about what he was going to do with $50,000. He had a car in mind. Something European, something with leather seats and a sound system that cost more than most people's rent. Something that said, I have arrived. On the service lane to the right, a set of headlights swept across the junction without slowing, moving south. Then another, then a third, and a fourth, and a fifth. And Marcus frowned and looked, and saw, at the junction, just for a moment, A line of motorcycles rolling past in the dark. A dozen, maybe more, moving fast and low, heading south with their lights cut down. He felt, for just a second, the smallest brush of something cold across the back of his neck. Then Deke climbed back in, and Marcus put the car in drive, and told himself it was a club ride. Fall was the last good riding season. It didn't mean anything. He didn't know those were Cutter's flanking teams. He didn't know that one of them had logged the SUV's plate and sent it to Leo before the junction was even behind them. He turned onto Fairfax Road, headlights cutting through the dark toward the old mill, and felt nothing but confidence. The Fairfax mill had once made denim, shipped out in bolts to factories across the South. That was 30 years ago. Now it was a series of collapsed and semi-collapsed buildings surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence, its windows black and empty, its corrugated metal walls bleached silver gray by weather and time. The kind of place that appeared on no municipal development plan, that no inspector ever visited, that existed in administrative records as a liability no one had gotten around to resolving. For Marcus's purposes, it was ideal. The SUV crunched across the gravel yard to the main loading dock. Two battery-powered work lights threw harsh white illumination across a concrete floor stained with 30 years of industrial residue. A folding table, 2 chairs, plastic zip ties, a first aid kit Marcus had no intention of using, the setup for a transaction, not a stay. Marcus popped the trunk. Mia Chen was curled in the corner of the cargo space, pressed against the wheel well. Her braid was half undone. Her eyes were wide. She looked at Marcus the way a cornered animal looks at the thing that has finally run it to ground, not with complete defeat, but with the specific horror of a creature that understands in full what it is facing. "End of the road," Marcus said pleasantly. He reached in and grabbed her arm. Mia didn't fight, not because she had given up, but because Bear had told her quietly, "Don't fight until you have an ally. Save your energy." She held this instruction like a talisman as Marcus pulled her out of the trunk, set her on her feet on the gravel, and steered her through the loading dock entrance. He zip-tied her wrists to the armrests of the folding chair with the practiced ease of someone who had done this before. Then he stepped back, produced a cigarette, and lit it with a steel lighter, moving with an unhurried deliberateness that said, "I have all the time in the world, and you have none." "Anybody know where you are?" he asked. Mia said nothing. Marcus smiled. "Right answer, nobody does." He took a drag, exhaled. "Your mom didn't exactly have a lot of people in her address book. No dad on the scene. No neighbors who pay attention." He tilted his head, studying her with the clinical interest of someone examining a map. "Which makes you a problem with no one looking for a solution." He paused. "Except you made a phone call, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. Rose saw the screen light up in the rear view. Mia's blood ran cold. Marcus reached over and patted the pocket of her hoodie, found the phone, pulled it out, and looked at the screen. The open call, now reading, "Call duration, 4723, battery at 4%. He stared at it. Then he started to laugh. It was the laugh of a man who has found something so absurd it briefly overwhelms his professionalism. He held the phone up for Deke and Roe to see. "She's been on the phone this whole time. Unknown number. She dialed a random number." He put the phone to his ear. "Hello? Who's there? You following us, hero?" Static. Marcus looked at the battery. 3% now, the warning blinking. He lowered the phone and crouched down to Mia's eye level. "Even if someone picked up, what are they going to do? Call the police?" He spread his hands in a gesture of expansive contempt. "The police don't come to Fairfax. They don't even know this building exists. And whoever you called, whoever randomly picked up, they're not coming." He tapped the side of his head. "Nobody's coming for you. You're a loose end in a county nobody cares about." He stood up, stubbed the cigarette on the concrete floor. "Nobody," he repeated, "is coming." The phone's battery died, the screen went dark, and then, faint at first, almost subliminal, the way a change in weather announces itself before the sky shifts, the floor began to vibrate. Marcus felt it through the soles of his shoes. He frowned, looked down. Deke looked at his hands, which were resting on the folding table, which was trembling. Not an earthquake, not the settling of old building foundations, something rhythmic and deliberate and growing, the way a drum beat grows when the drummer is walking toward you, the way thunder grows when the storm is not yet overhead, but soon will be. Roe moved to the broken window and looked out at the dark yard. "Marcus," he said. His voice had lost something it usually carried. "What?" Roe didn't answer immediately. He was staring at the horizon beyond the fence. At first, the darkness was uniform, complete. Then, at the far edge of the gravel road, at the bend where it disappeared behind a stand of dead trees, lights appeared. 2 of them, then 4, then 20, then 40, then a number that stopped making sense to count. A wall of white light flowing around the bend and filling the yard with a cold, blinding illumination that swept in through every broken window and every gap in the corrugated walls simultaneously, turning the midnight darkness of the Fairfax Mill into something that resembled, with disquieting accuracy, day. And the sound was no longer vibration. It was a roar. It was 230 V-twin engines at full throat, a sound like the earth clearing its voice, like 230 promises being kept at the same time. Marcus stared through the window. For the first time in a very long professional career, he had absolutely no idea what to say. In the chair in the center of the room, Mia Chen tipped her head back and let out a breath that contained, in its 4-second duration, every second of the last hour. He promised. The thought was steady and warm and certain. He came. The bikers did not rush. This was the most terrifying thing about them. They rolled in at 20 miles an hour, steady, unstoppable, the column flowing through the fence gap and spreading across the gravel yard like a tide filling a harbor, bikes fanning out to cover every angle of the building, every exit, every shadow. The headlights, all 230 angled at the mill's walls, did not flicker or vary. They simply were, steady and total, a wall of light that eliminated every corner of darkness the mill had relied upon for 30 years. Bear was the last one through the fence. He pulled his street glide to a slow stop 10 yards from the loading dock entrance and put down his kickstand. For a moment he just sat there, engine idling, looking at the building. Then he swung his leg over and stood up, all 6'4" of him, and pulled off his helmet and set it on the seat. He walked forward without hurrying. The gravel crunched under his boots. The other engines fell away to a low idle and then cut out one by one, until there was only the wind and the sound of Bear's footsteps and the distant, hopeful singing of crickets. He stopped at the loading dock doors, corrugated metal, padlocked from inside. He looked at the padlock. He looked at the men to either side of him, Hound, Cutter, and a man named Priest, who had forearms like bridge cables and had once removed a car door from its frame with his bare hands out of sheer impatience. He nodded. Priest's boot connected with the center of the door at precisely the height of the internal latch. The corrugated metal crumpled, and the door swung inward with a screech of torn steel that echoed off the interior walls and died somewhere in the rafters. Bear walked in. The work lights were still running. 2 pools of harsh white illumination on a concrete floor. In one of those pools, a folding table, a first aid kit, a stub of a cigarette on the floor. In the center of the room, tied to a folding chair, a small girl with a half-undone braid and a hoodie pulled close, her dark eyes wide and reflecting the light from the shattered doorway. Off to the left, near the far wall, Marcus Hale, Deke, and Roe, standing in a cluster with the specific body language of men who have just recalculated everything and found the numbers catastrophically wrong. Marcus had drawn his gun, a reflex that was now, in the face of the reality pouring through the doorway, more a habit than a strategy. He pointed it at Bear with the desperate focus of a man trying to restore a negotiating advantage that had, to be perfectly honest, never been his. "Back up," Marcus said. His voice was still trying to be what it was in the car. It wasn't quite getting there. "Back up right now, or I—" Bear walked toward him, medium pace, deliberate, his eyes on Marcus's face with an expression of such absolute focused displeasure that it was less a look than a weather event. "Stop," Marcus said. "I will—" "No," Bear said, just the one word. And then the rest of the chapter poured through the door. 100 men in leather, filling the loading dock wall to wall, shoulder to shoulder, quiet as tombstones. Hound was there. Cutter was there. A dozen veterans with road maps of scars and eyes that had seen worse things than one man with one gun and two associates who had already taken 2 involuntary steps backward without appearing to notice they'd done it. Marcus looked at the gun, looked at Bear, looked at the men behind Bear, looked at the gun again. Physics, his expression suggested, was not cooperating. "Here's what happens now," Bear said, still walking, his voice still at conversational volume, which under the circumstances was more unsettling than a shout. "You're going to put that down, then you're going to tell me where the rest of your operation is, and then—" He stopped 6 feet from Marcus, close enough that the barrel was approximately 1 inch from meaning anything to him. "Then we're going to talk about what you did to that girl's mother." Marcus held the gun for 3 more seconds. Then Bear's hand moved. Not fast, not dramatically, just the purposeful extension of a very large hand, and took it away. It was not a complex maneuver. It did not need to be. What followed was efficient and, by the standards of the chapter, restrained. Deke's attempt at resistance lasted roughly 4 seconds. Rowe didn't attempt resistance at all. Marcus, who made one final effort to reassert control by swinging at Bear with the confidence of a man who had never lost a fight he'd started, discovered in the space of 2 punches that confidence has a ceiling. Bear caught the fist, twisted, felt the wrist bones flex in a way wrist bones are not meant to flex. Marcus made a sound and went to one knee. "That's for her mom," Bear said quietly. He let go, stepped past the kneeling man, and walked to the center of the room. Mia Chun was staring at him. Her eyes were doing several things simultaneously, processing the scale of what had just entered the room, tracking the controlled motion around her, and performing the specific mental calculation that 12-year-olds make when determining whether the enormous, scarred, terrifying man walking toward them is, in fact, safe. Bear pulled out the pocket knife he'd carried for 30 years and crouched in front of the chair. He cut the zip ties. He put the knife away. Then he held still, big and quiet, giving the girl room to decide what happened next. "Hey," he said softly. Mia Chen, who had been holding herself together for the better part of 2 hours with the kind of focused effort that only terror and determination combined can produce, looked at the man crouching in front of her. She looked at him for one long moment. Then she launched herself forward and buried her face against his chest. Bear's arms came up around her. They were arms that could have bent rebar. They held her like something made of glass. "I got you," he said, low and steady into the top of her head. "You hear me? I got you. It's done. You're safe." Mia held on. Around them, the chapter moved with systematic purpose. Marcus and his associates being bound with zip ties that were emphatically not going to give way. Weapons secured. The building cleared room by room. Somewhere near the back wall, Leo had already called 911 with the address. Anonymous, specific, sufficient. In the center of all of it, a 55-year-old man covered in scars and old ink held a 12-year-old girl and said nothing more than, "I got you," because nothing more than that needed saying. Mad, Marge was not, despite what her road name suggested, a person who was simply mad. She was a person who felt things at a volume most people reserved for emergencies, and who had spent 30 years in this world learning to turn that volume into something useful. She was 40 years old, broad-shouldered, tattooed from collar to wrist, with a face that defaulted to a scowl and eyes that, if you watched them carefully, gave away considerably more than the scowl intended. She pushed through the crowd in the loading dock with the authority of someone accustomed to being underestimated, carrying the first aid kit from the SUV and a water bottle she'd found in a saddlebag. "Move!" she said to 2 large men blocking her path. They moved. She crouched beside Bear, looked at Mia, and her expression did something complicated. Stayed complicated. "Hey, little fighter," she said. Her voice, which at full volume could vibrate window glass, had dropped to something almost domestic. "Can I look at your wrists?" Mia lifted her head from Bear's chest and looked at Marge carefully. The tattoos, the scowl, the eyes. Then she held out her wrists. The skin was abraded and red where she'd pulled against the plastic. Marge cleaned it without ceremony, applied antiseptic, and wrapped both wrists in gauze with a surprising deftness. "You'll live," she said. "Kicking the taillight out, that was smart." "Bear told me to," Mia said, her voice rough. "Bear tells people to do things," Marge said dryly, throwing a glance at the man now standing 6 feet away with his arms crossed, watching Cutter secure Marcus with what appeared to be an entire roll of zip ties. "Most of us need to hear it a few times before we do it." This surprised a brief, wet, almost laugh out of Mia. Half a dozen men nearby turned their heads, and more than one of them had an expression they would have denied with considerable force if it had been described aloud. "Her mother," Bear said without turning. "Crane Street." "Danny and 2 others left 20 minutes ago," Marge confirmed. "Sarah Chen. They found her conscious. Paramedics are with her." She watched Mia's face as she said it. Mia's whole body changed, like a fist slowly unclenching. She put her hands over her face and made no sound at all, but her shoulders shook with the relief of it. "She's going to be okay, honey," Marge said. Across the room, Cutter had propped Marcus against the wall, hands bound behind him, his knee giving him obvious trouble. He looked at the men around him, at the room full of leather and cold, focused energy, with the expression of someone who had spent his professional life reading rooms and had catastrophically misread this one. Bear walked over to him, stood above him, said nothing for a moment, just looked, and the quality of that look was such that Marcus, who had sat comfortably across police interrogation tables with casual silence, found the silence here considerably less comfortable. "You told her nobody was coming," Bear said. Marcus swallowed. "I didn't know." "No," Bear agreed. "You didn't." He crouched to eye level, the same posture he'd taken with Mia, but with an entirely different quality. "You picked up a 12-year-old girl, you left her mother for dead, and you put that child in the dark and told her she didn't matter enough for anyone to come find her." A pause. "You were wrong about all 3. He stood. "Make sure he's comfortable," he said to no one in particular, with an inflection that suggested comfortable was a flexible concept. Nearby, Leo was already on his phone, sending everything he'd gathered, the SUV's plates, names from documents found in the vehicle, a contact list phone from Marcus's jacket, to 2 journalists, one police detective who had over the years developed a selective and pragmatic relationship with the chapter, and a federal task force coordinator who had been building a case against Marcus's organization for 18 months. By morning, Marcus Hale would not be a loose end. He would be the opening paragraph of a very long story. The first siren was audible at 12 minutes past midnight. Bear heard it from outside the loading dock, where he stood in the cold October air looking at the sky. Clear, stars visible from here, away from the city's light. He could smell exhaust and gravel dust and the sharp cold of a late fall night that knows winter is coming. He held his vest in one hand, his own vest, the chapter colors, the patches he'd worn for 30 years. He'd taken it off while Marge tended to Mia. He folded it now along the seams, then unfolded it again. He had a habit, when thinking, of doing things with his hands. Behind him, the boots and voices of 200 and some men moved with quiet efficiency. Engines restarting, kickstands coming up, the chapter organizing itself to leave the way it had arrived, all at once, leaving behind nothing more than tire tracks and a gift. He went back inside. Mia was on her feet now, Marge beside her, holding the water bottle with both hands. She looked, in the harsh worklight, exhausted and small, and also, somehow, not small at all. There was something in the set of her jaw, in the clearness of her dark eyes, that suggested a person who had been tested and had come out the other side carrying more than she'd brought in. Bear walked over and held out his vest. It was enormous on her. The thing swallowed her entire upper body, fell to mid-thigh, the patches and pins and leather heavy with 30 years of road miles. He draped it over her shoulders without ceremony, the way you'd put a blanket around someone cold. Mia looked up at him. "You'll be warm," he said, practical. She gripped the lapels from inside, holding the vest closed. "Are you leaving?" Bear glanced toward the door, toward the distant sound of approaching sirens. "Police are coming. It's better if we're not here." He looked back at her. You understand? Mia looked at him for a long moment, 12 years old, in a stolen vest in an empty mill, the last 2 hours written on her face like a story that would take years to fully read. She looked at the room, the trussed men against the wall, the departing chapter, the man in front of her who had answered a random number in the middle of a Thursday night and brought 230 people across the county to make good on a promise. "Thank you," she said, very quiet, very certain. Bear looked at her with the expression of a man who doesn't trust himself to speak. "You keep that," he said, meaning the vest. He cleared his throat. "Someone'll come for you soon. You stay in the light and wave them down." He turned to go. "Bear," Mia said. He stopped, turned back. "What's on your arm?" she asked. "The angel tattoo." The question sat in the air with a weight that had nothing to do with its size. Bear looked down at his forearm, at the simple lines of the small angel, at the name below it. "My daughter," he said. "Emma." He let the silence stay for a moment. Then he turned and walked toward the door, where the chapter waited. The police found Marcus Hale and his associates at 12:18 a.m., bound in industrial zip ties, the interior lit by 2 work lamps, a child's evidence trail laid out in photographs on the table, Leo's doing, printed from a portable device, and a note in thick, angular handwriting on a bar napkin. 3 counts minimum. Federal. He'll know the rest. They also found a girl sitting on a folding chair in the middle of the room, wearing a leather vest 4 sizes too large, her wrists wrapped in gauze, holding an empty water bottle, watching the door with an expression so calm it concerned the first officer on the scene. "Are you hurt?" the officer asked her. "No," Mia said. "I'm okay." "Was there anyone here with you before we arrived?" Mia thought about Bear's voice in the dark, about the sound of 230 engines turning a midnight field into daylight, about the hair clip on a gas station forecourt, and the footsteps on gravel, and the door coming off its frame, and the arms that had held her like glass. "No," she said. "I was alone." She pulled the leather vest a little tighter and said nothing more. Outside, the last taillights of 230 motorcycles disappeared around the bend in the road, flowing back into the dark county night the way a tide flows out. Quiet, complete, leaving no trace except the memory of what it had moved. 4 months later. Spring came early to County Road 7 that year, crocuses in the median by mid-February, snowdrops along the fence line of the Rusty Piston by late month, and by the first Saturday of March, a warmth in the afternoon air that made engines want to run and men who owned them want reasons to. Arthur Vance had a reason. He pulled up the address on his phone, a new house, not Crane Street, a modest 2-bedroom on the east side of the county, where Sarah Chen had relocated her small household after 3 weeks in hospital and several more weeks in the careful, exhausting work of recovery. Sarah had a job again, a temp position that was becoming permanent. Mia had a new school, where she was by all accounts doing exceptionally well. He'd sent a note 6 weeks after the mill. Just a note. No return address, his handwriting identified only by the same thick, angular quality that had been on the bar napkin. "Your daughter is remarkable. She kept herself alive for 2 hours in the dark. She deserves to know how strong that makes her." He hadn't expected a reply. He got one anyway, 3 weeks later, a single sheet of paper in a plain envelope addressed to the Rusty Piston, County Road 7, which told him that Sarah Chen had done some research. The note said, "My daughter asks about you. She'd like you to come to her birthday, March 7th. It's her 13th. She says to tell you she still has the vest." Bear had read this note alone, on a Tuesday morning with a cup of coffee going cold beside him. He'd read it 3 times. Then he put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, against the lining, where he kept the only other piece of paper he'd carried for 15 years. March 7th was today. It was also, by no particular coincidence, a Saturday, a good writing day, writing. The chapter had been informed in the way the chapter was informed of things that required unanimous participation, not an announcement, but an understanding, passed along in the wordless language of people who had ridden thousands of miles together and no longer needed to discuss certain things. By 9 that morning, the parking lot of the Rusty Piston was as full as it had been in October, chrome catching the March sun, men in leather adjusting gloves and checking mirrors and not saying anything in particular about where they were going or why. Leo emerged from the bar carrying an enormous, elaborately wrapped package in lurid pink paper which he loaded into a side case with the focused care of someone diffusing something. He caught Marge watching him. "What?" he said. Marge was holding a smaller package, also pink, tied with a silver ribbon. She raised an eyebrow in a way that required no translation. "It's a laptop," Leo said, somewhat defensively. "She mentioned she wanted to learn coding. It's practical." "It's pink," Marge pointed out. "She's 13. You bought a pink laptop for a 13-year-old you've never met." Leo adjusted his glasses. "It has a very good processor." Marge almost smiled. She got on her bike. Cutter had passed word in mid-February. Anyone who wanted to bring something should keep it practical and not overwhelming. The response had been characteristic of the chapter. 38 people had decided that practical meant a generous gift certificate to the local bookstore. 17 had gone with the art supply store. A dozen had brought clothing. 4 had brought actual books. And 2, independently of each other, had brought birthday cakes, both chocolate. The column organized itself in the usual way, Bear at the front, the rest falling in behind, 2 by 2, until the queue stretched back past the fence and around the bend. He thought about Emma. He did this less often than he used to, and in a different register now. Not with the old hollow helplessness, but with something that had, over time, shifted into gratitude that she had existed, that she had been his for 8 years. That the scar she had left behind had made him, in this particular and improbable way, useful. He thought about a girl in the dark who had dialed a random number and reached exactly who she needed. He thought about the phone buzzing on the shelf behind the register, the small whisper from the receiver. "Please, it's dark." Bear put the Street Glide in gear and rolled out of the lot onto County Road 7, pointed east into the morning sun. Behind him, the sound built the same way it always did. 1 engine, then 2, then all of them at once. That great rolling chord that vibrated in the chest and the bones and something below the bones. A sound that was in equal measure freedom and brotherhood and all the unsayable things that men who had chosen this life carried with them on every road they ever rode. The house on Eastfield Drive was a simple one. Cream-painted siding, a small front lawn with a bicycle lying on its side by the path, a porch with 2 wooden chairs and a welcome mat that said, "Home." The kind of house that advertised nothing but its own ordinariness. Sarah Chen was in the yard when the first engine turned the corner onto Eastfield Drive. She'd been expecting something. She was not sure she had been expecting this. The column came around the corner in the same measured way it always did. 2 by 2, deliberate, filling the street from curb to curb, the sound rolling ahead of it and washing over the small yard and the cream-painted house. She counted. She stopped counting. The column was still coming. It filled the block. It was still filling the block. They parked in a careful line along the curb on both sides of the street, engines cutting out in sequence, silence returning to Eastfield Drive by degrees. Sarah stood on the lawn with her hand over her mouth, watching. The front door opened and Mia came out. She was wearing jeans and a green sweater, her hair down around her shoulders, 13 years old today, and she looked different from the girl who had come home from the hospital 4 months ago. Not in any specific feature, but in some quality beneath the features, something resettled and reestablished, a floor that had been tested and had held. She came down the porch steps and stood on the front path and looked at the street, which was lined from corner to corner with motorcycles and the men who rode them. Bear was walking up the path. He stopped at the foot of the porch steps and looked at the girl who had called a random number in the dark and refused to give up. "Happy birthday," he said. Mia looked at him. She hadn't seen him since the mill, hadn't seen any of them, but she had the look of someone for whom the past 4 months had been a long wait for this moment, held with the patient certainty that it would come. "You brought everyone," she said. They invited themselves, Bear said. Which was more or less true. Mia looked past him at the street. 230 faces, leather vests, road-worn and weathered and lined with miles, watching her with expressions that ranged from gruff to awkward to something considerably more complicated. Some had their hands in their pockets. Some were carrying packages. Two in the back appeared to be competing over who would carry their box to the porch. "I still have the vest," she told Bear. "I know." He held out a small package, neatly wrapped, no bow. She took it and opened it. Inside, between layers of tissue paper, was a motorcycle club patch. Not a Hells Angels patch, but a small embroidered square that read, in careful stitching, Honorary Guardian, Reno Chapter. Beneath it, a card in his handwriting. "You kept yourself alive long enough for us to find you. That's not luck, that's grit. Welcome to the family." Mia held the patch for a moment, then she looked up. "Thank you," she said. The same two words as the mill, the same quiet certainty, but different in tenor now. Not the relief at the end of something. The beginning. Bear nodded. He stepped aside, and the line of chapter members began moving up the path. 230 men, each paying his respects in his own way. A nod, a brief word, a package passed over with surprising gentleness. Marge came near the middle and put an arm briefly around Mia's shoulders with the matter-of-fact warmth of someone who has decided without announcement that certain protections are permanent. Leo arrived with the pink laptop. He had brought a card explaining, in 3 paragraphs, what the processor was capable of. He was also blushing, which Mia found charming. Sarah Chen stood on the porch and watched her daughter receive 230 birthday greetings from 230 people who had driven through an October night for a stranger's phone call, and said nothing, because there was nothing language was quite built for. The 2 chocolate birthday cakes appeared on a folding table deployed in the yard. Someone produced a speaker from a saddlebag. The music that came out of it was loud and unsubtle, played at a volume in technical violation of at least 2 municipal noise ordinances, and the afternoon on Eastfield Drive became, by any reasonable measure, a party. Bear stood to one side, as he always stood at the edge of things, watching the room, watching the street, watching the girl in the green sweater moving through the crowd of leather-clad men with a naturalness that would have baffled anyone who hadn't been there for what preceded it. Marge appeared beside him, as she did sometimes when she wanted to say something and was deciding whether to say it. "She's going to be all right," Marge said. "Yeah," Bear said. "She is." A silence settled between them. In the yard, 2 men Bear had personally witnessed commit acts of significant violence were bent over the birthday table together, hands cupped, trying to light candles in the March wind with expressions of intense concentration on their faces. He watched them. Something moved in his chest that was not precisely sadness and not precisely happiness and had no clean name. "She called us by accident," he said. "Yes," Marge agreed. "Couldn't have called anyone better," he said. Marge looked at him. Her eyes did the thing they did when they gave away more than the scowl intended. "No," she said. "She couldn't have." The candles finally caught. The song went up, ragged and tuneless and entirely sincere. 200 and some voices singing happy birthday to a 13-year-old girl on a street in the East County. Their breath visible in the March air, their engines cooling in the afternoon sun. Mia looked at the candles. She made her wish. She blew them out.